Okay, thank you very much, Rina. I'm very happy to speak again to this beautiful audience. We are becoming a family now. Now, the title of this talk is I would call it a post-revolution space for women's movement, to make it more specific. In reflecting on women's issues after the Arab Spring, a lot of us now call it the so-called Arab Spring, I introduced, now as part of that book, the notion of the center and the centrality of women's issues in it. I will introduce the center to you the way I see it and attempt later on to explain it. So I will introduce it and then explain it. The center, as I see it, refers to an ideological middle ground space between the increasingly antagonistic paradigms, political paradigms of secularism, which is the separation of religion and politics, and Islamism, the use of religion in politics, in the post-revolution North Africa. In that book, what I mean by North Africa is mainly Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Mauritania, Morocco, and Algeria. I mean, I am not going into that unless you ask me questions, because there are Sudan is also in that. So including various versions of this new center includes various versions of the two paradigms, secularism and Islamism, but also stretching the space to allow more diversity. The center was partly created by women's issues, as these have been consistently used as the bone of contention between the two paradigms, the secularists and the Islamists. As part and parcel of the various demands by civil society and the population at large, women's issues are becoming more diversified and polyvocal. And as new actors and new agents are gaining visibility in the public sphere of authority, this diversification is in turn being nourished by new values, dignity, karama, and new approaches, the use of social media and transnational networking. In other words, the center is both a space for hitherto marginalized voices, okay, and a space where women's demands converse with, among other parties, human rights demands and cultural demands, like demands for Berber to be an official language. It is a new physical and virtual site of protest. Protest is part of our culture, but we see it differently now, that emerged with new democratic movements that are continuing even after these movements have been substantially weakened. But the idea is still there, because this space answers a real need in the North African public discourse, which up to the pre-revolution era was dominated by the secularist Islamic frontal antagonism before the Arab Spring. Now this in turn is reflected in the increase of tension between women's rights organizations and the Islamists. This is before the Arab Spring. So in an attempt to circumvent the complex nature of the center as a post-revolution space for women's rights, I will address and relate four major issues. The first one is somehow contextualize this center, give the history of the secularist Islamist dichotomy in the region. Where does it come from? I'm going to use just modern history. I'm not going into the pre-modern and it's just the modern history. Second, I will compare the two ideologies, secularism and Islamism. And third, I will then talk about the center as neither exclusively secular or exclusively Islamist, but diverse, protest-based, leaderless, and very pragmatic. So let's look at the secularist Islamist dichotomy. Where does it come from? Now I don't want to look at my notes for a while, and just to do it by looking at you. Now, during the colonization of North Africa, we had mainly French and some, of course, the British in Egypt and Sudan. The colonizers, of course, gave way to nationalism. And nationalism was based on Islam, of course, and tradition, as opposed to the invaded colonizers. But the colonizers also used the divide to rule. If you want, wherever, in Morocco, for example, it's the Dahir Berber, which divided Berbers and the Arabs. So the secularist Islamist dichotomy in North Africa has a history of its own. Initially, it was termed conservative modernists. It doesn't mean that conservative modernist has disappeared, but keep it in mind. It all started there. Conservative modernist dichotomy, which existed, which was born after the colonizers tried to divide the populations in the region, mainly Arabs, Berbers. The mighty transformation that followed this were accompanied by two trends, a conservative trend and a modernist trend. Now, why this is important? Both trends, while both of them supported nationalism, and they significantly differed in their reaction to the West and the modernity brought by the West. So, the conservatives opposed any influence of the West, especially in family and social matters. And modernists viewed the West as progress. So the dichotomy was then qualified as conservative modernist. And it was shown in the lifestyle, especially what women wore and how the lifestyle of the populations. Fine, this is across the region. But starting from 1970s onward, we started to see a rampant political Islam, which has roots, of course. I'm not going into that unless you ask me, in Egypt, and then reached us. Political Islam in the background, which basically, as I mentioned the first day, attacked this lifestyle. Now, this conservative modernist dichotomy developed into something else. It developed into secularist Islamist one. It's important to know that this new development did not supplant, did not uproot the initial modernist conservative dichotomy. What it did is politicize it. It politicized it, hence polarized it, and rendered it more complex. In other words, Islamists, de facto conservative, claimed a new view of Islam that discards traditional customs and mores, but highlights a nostalgia to the past. Yeah. In a way, it wanted to erase the nation, Francis, the Ummah, the past, the Caliphate. This is what Daesh is using. But these are very important for us. These icons of identity, this is, between quotes, what Daesh is using. Okay. It even tried to erase the frontiers of nations. Good. Now, these views clashed with the modernists, de facto secularists, who valued some aspects of tradition but targeted the future. While the conservative modernist dichotomy is more attested at the social level, the secularist Islamist dichotomy is more attested in politics and ideology. That's the thing that I think should be really underlined. Consequently, while conservative modernist is generally accommodated in North Africa, it doesn't really create a problem. It's good to be conservative and modernist in North Africans' behavior and way of life. The secularist Islamist exhibits clear divergences among North Africans. For a better understanding of the complexities involved, the relevant categories need to be debunked. So what I'm going to do is to show affinities between the modernists and the secularists. Why these affinities on the one hand, and the conservatives and Islamists on the other hand. Let's focus for a moment on the modernist secularists. Okay. Now, modernist secularists share a focus on the present and the future, but do not entail the same representations and meanings in the North African context. Linguistically speaking, being modern, being asri, being modern derives from asr, era. Yeah, it's of this era, and means of this era. This concept is general and spans all walks of life, from the family to the street to the government. Good. Modernists are in general urban, educated, and without denying religion, they do not highlight it. As for the counterpart, Ilmani, secularist, it really is a word. I always say that words are like human beings. Human beings, some of us are stopped at the frontier, the customs, searched, whatever, experienced that. But some of the words just come in the culture, like television, like radio, like whatever, they just sneak in, no problem. But something like Ilmani, like secular, when it becomes Ilmani, so we have all sorts of definition. Is it from alam, globalization? Is it from ilm? Where is religion? All that. So Ilmani, secularist, it mainly spans the public sphere only, especially the political and legal aspects, because there they clash with legal Islam. Okay, so like modernists, secularists tend to be educated and urban, but they view religion as more private than public matter in the region. In Morocco, for example, monarchy embodies the highest political and religious authority. So secularists espouse modernity, but stress the separation of religion and politics in the public sphere. This is the reason why, for example, Moroccan secular feminists have always sought to improve, not replace, Sharia law. For secular forces, Islamic law is an ancient form of law that only works in religious fields. For them, the Muslim countries require modern secular laws. This is the secularist. Indeed, for secularists, religion should only work in social life and should not interfere with secular politics. Otherwise, society will go backward. Especially that the past is internalized in the tradition. Remember, the conservative modernist, this is not dead yet. So in that culture, in that tradition, the past is glorified. We love it. It's part of us. We don't want to let go. Further, with compulsory primary education, progress and modernization have been achieved, and this is itself constitutes a great impetus for secular forces. I make a difference between modernity, modernism, and modernization. So take the Gulf countries, for example, they are modernized, but modernity, good modernization because of the money. Modernity is it's a state of mind. It's whatever you call it. It's like security, very difficult, but it's something that drives you forward. Okay. Now, modernism is when you work. The ism is an ideology. Is when you actually work for that. So there's that difference also to keep at the back of our minds. Further, so with education and so on. This is not modernization, but some kind of modernity was started to be appreciated by the populations. They say it's good. Because I take Morocco, for example, the education of women is highly valued. Yeah, people, they really admire you when you are educated. But work, that's something else. When you go out to work, when you have also to take care of other things. That's another thing I'm not going into here. So both modernists and secularists capitalize on women's education to cross the fine, subtle religious barrier instrumentalized by the conservatives and Islamists. Okay, let us now look at the conservatives and Islamists, these two. Conservatives, Islamists focus in their references on the past, more than the present or the future. The term taqlidi, again, taqlidi, conservative, but it derives from taqlid, which means imitation. That's how we refer to them. In the decade that preceded state building, nationalism and struggle for independence were the main concerns, and conservatism was a way of sustaining the Arab Muslim identity that was important. However, during the state building phase, conservatives had to cohabit with modernists. They accepted the fact without melting into them. It was then important to maintain the conservative-modernist dichotomy, as the North African countries wanted to be, at the same time, part of the larger Ummah and modern. With the coming of political Islam, globalization and social media, the schism, division between conservatives and modernists widened and became more complex. Consequently, the conservative trend, or part of it, hardened into the Islamist one after the emergence of political Islam. However, Islamists do not constitute a homogeneous group, but they share the use of Islam in politics as a sine qua non condition. As with the modernist secularists, conservative Islamists capitalize on women's issues in their campaigns and debates. But unlike